Each year, over 1 million people walk through the gates at the Iowa State Fair. But there have been years, 5 to be exact, in which the fair became a wartime casualty. In 1898, the use of the fairgrounds by the military during the Spanish-American War, as well as the occurrence of the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition in Omaha, would lead to the first cancellation of the fair in its history. Then in 1942, the federal government leased the fairgrounds for use as a World War II military supply and storage depot.
They were looking for a depot for the Army Air Force, and this made a real good location for them. It's got the buildings, the railroad situation all fit right in.
Floyd Dietz was superintendent of buildings and grounds when he took over the position from his father Henry Dietz in 1961 until he retired in 1985. Floyd learned from his father, who held the position from 1921 to 1961 and who lived on the fairgrounds during World War II's military occupation. Early in the year, plans for a scaled-down version of the fair were in the works. However, in April of 1942, after Executive Council approval of the lease of the grounds, the 1942 fair being canceled seemed imminent. Plans for a downsized version of the fair were eventually canceled when the request came down from Washington to suspend all statewide events and limit travel in the interest of conserving tires and gasoline.
The fair board still had cattle sales and other little programs, and they had a couple buildings that's just on the north side of Grand Avenue that they could use for shows and stuff like that, but wasn't very big.
While still living in the superintendent's house during wartime, once located near grandfather's barn, it was Henry's job as superintendent to see that the grounds and buildings remained unharmed.
There wasn't anything that would do any damage to the buildings. We all had credentials. Everybody had credentials. It was pretty well guarded. There wasn't much publicity on it. But it was quite an experience working all that stuff.
Terms of the military lease stated that the portion of the fairgrounds south of Grand Avenue, which housed most of the exhibit buildings and livestock barns, would be used and a fence built up the center of Grand Avenue to separate the north and south. The fence continued on the east side of the grandstand up to the state-retained campgrounds, which were not desired by the Army. The north half of the grounds were also retained by the state, since there were few buildings located there. The military storage and supply depot mainly housed parts for the C-54 four-engine transport plane. The administration building served as housing for guards and the main offices of the Army Air Corps. The top-secret Norden bomb site, which allowed for unprecedented accuracy in bombing from high altitudes during the day, was also housed there under constant guard. The 4-H boys' dormitory, an all-concrete building, and the enclosed agriculture building also served as a good space for storage. What is now the 4-H exhibits building was the only building that was heated, and all pens and stalls were removed for more storage space. Stalls and pens were also removed from the horse, cattle, sheep, and swine barns. The parts that were removed were stored in buildings that were not occupied by the military. The Varied Industries building was an open-air structure at the time, but the military enclosed that space and put in new lighting and a small heating system. The fenced-off midway area, machinery grounds, and exhibit area under the grandstand were reserved for temporary outdoor storage.
And all this had to be put back after they moved out of there. And that was my job. Would help Dad do that.
As part of the agreement between the fair board and the United States government, the grounds would be leased for $1 for the duration of the war.
I think the fair board and the state wanted to do something for the cause, you know. They didn't want the money. They wanted to do something to help. We all did at that time. I mean, we was in war, bad shape.
Consequently, no fair was held from 1943 to 1945. The renewal of the fair in 1946 coincided with the centennial year of Iowa's statehood.
We had the fair then opened up again. Had a lot of people there for the first fair.
The Jubilee Fair drew an attendance of over 500,000 fairgoers and set attendance records at the time.
We had a lot of work to do that year.
So while you're out at the fairgrounds enjoying concessions, contests, and concerts, take a moment to remember the important role the grounds have played, not only in Iowa's history, but the nation's.